Hello, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi. And yeah, Seagoat first in, beating a couple of people there. There's always a race every week. So welcome to our live stream, and hi to everyone who's watching it on YouTube afterwards. So what do we have this week? We've got an Ask Me Anything, aka Ask Us Anything. We've got quite a few questions that people have been submitting on Discord. And if you've got any that you would like to ask, just put them in the chat. So who is here tonight? There's myself, there's the two Andys, there's Graham, and there's Mark. All the Rooks are here. Hooray!
Hooray!
And I think a couple of things to mention. Welcome to everyone who's new on Discord this week. We've had quite a few people coming in. And Andy Law, we've added a few channels this week. If you wanted to mention to people, I think, what they were.
I will mention the most important one out of them all, and that's that we've got a new preview channel opening up in the Rookery section, which is a new section that I've just literally installed 30 minutes ago. The preview section will be showing art and possibly layouts relatively soon, since Ship of Fools is now in a position where it's going to start getting laid out and becoming a real actual product that you're going to be able to buy and everything. It's
crazy.
this is quite the rush for us. It's real. So yes, the new channels for that, and a new channel for the streaming that we're doing as well, because obviously we're streaming out every week and saying hello to everybody. And as we do our playtest, we stream out and support the playtest with the stream as well. So as we do our streams, we'll be popping up information about when the next set of streams are. And if you've got anything that you'd like to have us discuss or have us cover in one of our streams, do drop it in there. As you probably know, if you're in our Discord channels, we're in there frequently. And we're often taking a look at what everybody says. So hopefully we'll see you in there. And do take a look. I'll put up an announcement with all the new streams sometime after this stream's finished.
Okay, so shall we start off with the first question? I am going to pick one. This is the third Andrew that makes a full set.
The trifecta.
The trifecta of Andrews.
Yeah.
Andrew
So when you
Bell
combine
asks,
3 Andrews, what do you get? A Hamish?
No, oh my gosh, no.
It's like one of those match 3 games, you know.
It's clearly an Angus. Come on, Graham.
Oh yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, I'm from Berkshire. What do I know?
So Andrew is asking us, what's your favorite combination of story and mechanics in RPGs/gaming?
That's a toughie to start with, isn't it?
I have an answer in the chamber, ready to go, unless anyone else wants to go first.
So
go.
Well, do you want to go first, Graham? And then...
No, you go, Andy.
All right. Well, because obviously I saw Andrew Bell posted this morning, so I've been thinking about it all day. And I've got a very specific one from our vampire game that we played back in the day, and I'm a big fan of kind of like merits and flaws that you can kind of buy for characters that both do something mechanical, but then they also drive story elements as well. So the specific example, the character that I played for like a decade in real time and 800 years in kind of campaign time. And I kind of picked a merit and a flaw totally arbitrarily, almost on a whim. And if I'm honest, from a slightly munchkin-y kind of way, you know, you took the flaw, one eye, because, well, he's not really doing any range combat because it's before guns get invented, so who cares? And you take the merit jack of all trades because there's only 3 of us in the party, and that's quite useful because that means you've got 1 dot in all the skills, so you can at least try your hand at everything. I didn't really think any deeper than that in picking those 2 things, but they both then had quite a profound effect on how the character played out over the next 800 years, kind of in time. That I think it never really became a huge systematic negative, but it made him very easily recognizable. Even when he began to develop disciplines like Protean and could change his shape, he still had this recognizable eye, which meant he therefore had to always assume that people knew who he was, which he was an arrogant venture, so he would do that anyway. But it did influence kind of how he played. And similarly with the Jack of all trades, as you progress through time, you know, the skills that are on your character sheet change because you get closer to the kind of modern era, and modern skills like computing and driving and things sort of appear. So then you had to think, well, how is he keeping up to date with those kind of skills? He must be kind of immersing himself more than he used to in humanity, which then influences how you play, and his humanity ends up going up. And it had quite a profound effect on who he was by the end of that chronicle. Just considering it was just a little merit that was just sort of taken on a whim. And I like things like that. I like where you can kind of take a thing it's more than just a systematic bonus. It becomes a kind of a springboard for storytelling. So that was my answer.
And in that case, it also gave our GM, storyteller, White Wolf, the opportunity to come up with some kind of rationale and support for why you had lost that eye, which wasn't entirely clear to us until later in that chronicle.
Indeed.
As is the way with Andrew.
I thought that revelation was too bonkers even for this scenario, so I can't get that one. Yeah.
Well, it got me thinking of Odin right away, sacrificing an eye for knowledge.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
So, Graham, what was your favourite combination?
Well, it's actually a couple of things, and also from Vampire.
Oh, wow.
And I liked the very first sort of couple of years of Vampire before he kind of went down the soap opera route with the published products. And the thing I liked was the humanity stat, because it's supposed to be a storytelling game of personal horror, and you've got to balance, you know, all the power you've got, all the things you can do and get away with, that there's a price to pay for them. And I thought that was a very neat, you know, for one line in a rule book, it was quite a powerful thing. And I also like the nature and demeanor as an excellent role-playing tool, because, you know, it helps you get a character together. Vampire's a game where you need to role-play a lot rather than just hitting things or biting things. And the idea of a character presenting one face to the world but being something else inside was very advanced role playing for 1991.
It was. I remember it. My answer is going to be completely different. I'm going to look a little bit about story mechanics. When I think of mechanics and how they drive story, I often think of computer role-playing games and computer strategy games in particular, because mechanics can drive you through a game. In fact, mechanics alone can make a game brilliant and enjoyable. Take a game like, say, for example, XCOM. If we look on the computer game side, XCOM's story is bobbins. Aliens come, you kill the aliens. That's pretty much it. Yeah. But the actual mechanics behind it is really good. The strategy role-playing, the development of your teams, the way the aliens come in and the various ways that you try to take them out, absolutely brilliant. And on the very opposite side, the story side, take a game like, say, Final Fantasy, which is basically all story, but the game is rubbish. Mm-hmm. I mean, bless it, it tries, and it's totally over the top. But the game is not very well balanced or clever, but the actual story and the characters is really good. And where those 2 points combine, where you get mechanics that make you want to play, and you get a story that makes you want to know what happens next, is clearly where the question's coming from. And I'm going to completely cop out for where my preference lies, because my preference lies in the sort of things that we're doing next in Rookery publications. What I mean, What Rides Beneath starts off with something that I think is beautiful. So my response is going to be, I will answer this question in approximately 3 months.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. But if you were at Compulsion, how many years ago was that now? About 10 years ago? 12 years ago? Then you might have an idea of what's coming. Appreciate that will be a limited audience.
It'll be a group of like 6. Plus a group of 12 that experienced the same thing at Games Day with Games Workshop when I ran a very big game there too. Yeah, good fun. Nature Demeanor, good stuff.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, no, Mark, you go.
I've always liked sort of Cthulhu mythos games where sanity is always a factor that you get to play about with. And I remember back before lockdown, we were playing, myself and my little gaming group were playing Mansions of Madness. And during the course of the adventure, I'd managed to develop a mental condition where I become a obsessive compulsive. And so whilst the rest of the party was up in the attic fighting the demon that had burst into our realm, I was downstairs in the lounge, meticulously searching every possible clue to find I would not leave a room until I had uncovered every possible piece of evidence or secret there. And of course, I couldn't communicate this to the party. You had to keep these things secret to yourself. So I'm trying to justify why I'm not joining the rest of the group in the attic. So it just creates a whole fun bunch of role-playing possibilities in games like that.
Yeah, I do, just on the merits and flaws, the same character that was in that coterie with Andy's one-eyed Ventru, she had, I can't remember what the flaw was called, but it was like insatiable curiosity or something, and that certainly drove us down some awkward places.
Yeah, that got us in a lot of trouble. Yeah.
My favourite combination of story and mechanics is probably a really strange one, maybe, and it's randomization of characters. So some of my favorite character facets have come from rolling characters randomly. I can think of one in Wifrit 2nd edition where it was like, well, where did she come from? Nordland. Whereabouts in Nordland? We rolled that randomly, D27. How many brothers or sisters does she have? Rolled that randomly, and then rolled their ages randomly. And one of them randomly happened to be a twin brother. And so, of course, in Warhammer, we then went down quite an interesting Sigmarite, but she was torn because she heard whispers in the village about what it meant to be a twin, and it really drove some kind of character development and drama and tension between the group that wouldn't have done if I just hadn't randomly rolled my brother's ages. They were all in the Navy as well, actually. That question will come up later, and you'll probably have no surprise in the answer.
And I suppose in our more recent Wifrit 4 campaign, like what happened with my character there as well, like I rolled up a charlatan, randomly rolled noble blood, and then he ended up being the missing kind of young Freud scion. So getting wrapped into kind of more significant stuff. So again, just because of the random things. Yeah.
So a really deep question. What's your favourite food? Why is it haggis? Well, yeah, my favourite food's not haggis, I'm afraid. I'm not such a stereotype. I don't actually have a favourite food. I'll leave that for somebody else to answer who actually does like haggis. Andy Law.
I do like haggis. I don't like veggie haggis as well. Haggis is great. If you haven't tried haggis, try haggis. Brilliant.
Yeah.
But if I was to pick up a quick favorite food, crisps, because I'm really shallow and I like massive over-salted snacks. I can't get enough of them, and it's really bad for me because I'm diabetic and I'm meant to be limiting such things because it's pure carb. And I don't care. So there you go. The truth. Chips for our American pals. Chips and crisps.
Oh, the other thing about those random PCs and with that particular group was we all rolled nobles, which was a bit weird, but worked out well in the end. Yeah. But yeah, there's a few comments here. Random tables are the best.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Really powerful. We can never have too many character creation tables. The thing is, the beauty is you can just ignore them if you don't like it.
Yeah.
You can or you can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, some people like to craft a character, whereas some people like the to randomly roll one and get inspired with how they play.
And there's still an element of crafting, even in with the random tables, isn't there? Because that's what you choose to kind of spend your XP on and stuff. If there were a system that had the randomness of the kind of Wifrit kind of career and initial stuff, but maybe also the point buy stuff of merit and flaws, that might be our like perfect. Yeah.
There you go. Get cracking.
Something to ponder.
Yeah. So returning to haggis, I find everything depends very much upon the haggis itself. Because I've had some really great haggis. Lived in Scotland for just a few months, but and I've also had some haggis at Highland, so-called Highland festivals here in the States.
Oh dear, no, American haggis. No.
Yeah, sort of a second cousin.
Doesn't travel. They don't travel well as a breed, do they?
No, they don't.
No.
And
they say it's free range. They say it's cage free raised, but it rarely is.
No, it's all the antibiotics.
Yeah, they certainly haven't been bred on the mountains.
And high fructose corn syrup.
Chlorinated haggis.
Yeah. But yeah, I've had some that was sort of second cousin to potted meat, with slapped with a tartan brush once or twice, and that was it.
Andy's gone mute.
He has.
So
apologies. I felt the need to tweet Graham's thing out there as he said that for no context Rookery. Sorry.
Of everything you've all created for the Rookery, what is your favorite so far? I'm going to go to Mark first. I'm going to pick on you. You've been in a fountain of creativity these last few months.
Oh, favorite though.
Is it like picking between children?
No. I if I had children, I would definitely have a favorite. I don't know. It's kind of been because it's been a bit of a sort of slight stylistic departure because the way I'm creating the art now is different to the way I would have created it previously. So that's been a fun learning process. I've enjoyed. I've done a couple of portraits for our sort of a narrator, Dr. Crow. And they've been interesting to do. I've enjoyed the challenge of sort of hinting at a character and coming up with sort of a series of costumes that they can wear every time you encounter them that's slightly different but has a sort of theme that runs through them. That's been fun. I enjoyed doing a bog mummy which is a mummy with a coracle strapped to its back, That was cool.
It was.
And honestly, anything that allows us to sort of hint at the sort of the deeper world, beyond just the surface of the art, I think is always a pleasure for me.
I've got an answer here. I'm going to pull on the theme of the day for me just now because I'm currently playing Mass Effect, as the talk makes clear, since it's just been revised. And in the beginning of Mass Effect, you get pretty much introduced to what will be the arc of the entire campaign within the first section, really. As for those of you who haven't played it, spoilers! Shut your ears now. But Commander Shepard arrives, gets on a planet, all manner of things happen on the planet, and then sees a big, giant, big fuck-off ship that tears off into the sky. introducing you to what that ship will be at a later point throughout the course of the entire adventure. And what have I enjoyed creating for the Rookery most is sitting down, building a campaign that not only does that, but does more too. I've been particularly enjoying building a story that starts as it intends to end. And isn't getting made up as you go along just because you happen to have made Adventure 1 and Adventure 2. Oh shit, that was popular. Let's make Adventure 3 and Adventure 4. And holy crap, how are we going to end this?
We'll fix it in post. Yeah.
We'll fix it in post. So, to summarize that one, what have I enjoyed creating most? Hopefully not fixing it in post.
I mean, I've got a couple of NPCs that I think are really good, but unfortunately, they're not out in the public domain yet. So I'm saying nothing.
Well, the only thing I've created for the Rookery so far is Ship of Fools, which I do quite like, but ask me in a couple of years. It's also been enormous fun. We've been kicking ideas about. I mean, the phrase "bog mummy" came up, which tickled our inner 12-year-olds. And off we went, and it's really kind of it's run far and fast and grown and prospered, and I just wait and see.
That is always really great. The seed of it, again, just a name, and then what that spins out to be is everybody sort of chips in and ideas flow. Before you know it, you've created almost like a sort of culture or a suite of characters and creatures. So that's awesome when that happens.
So, Joe Smoke, this is an interesting one. What has been your best and worst experiences when playing or running a game that you also worked on?
Ooh, it's a toughie.
I mean, I think the worst thing for me about playing in our Rift 4 game is when I might remember a rule that impedes me or one of the other PCs that maybe Andy hasn't mentioned yet. And then I feel obligated to be like, oh, I think actually he's got -10 on that. Sorry. Or, oh, no, that's actually a fumble. Oh, and the guilt I feel of having to do it right because I helped write it.
Whereas I just don't remember rules, so I never have that problem.
Fair.
I had a nice little moment way back in about 1988 when we were demoing Death on the Reich for the very first time at Dragon Meet or Games Day or some con in Nottingham it was anyway. And spoilers for anyone who hasn't played Death on the Reich yet. There's a section where you have to you're visiting a friend's house and they're missing and the house is ransacked and you find a child hiding and you have to get the truth out of her as to what happened. And the way I played it, it was quite challenging to calm this poor little 8-year-old girl down, particularly when she was surrounded by huge burly people bristling with weapons who looked not unlike the people who had just caused all the carnage in the house. And but one of we were using the pre-gens, and of course there's always a token elf, a token halfling, and what have you. And she caught sight of the elf, this little girl. And I thought, okay, here's my chance, because they were blowing all the rolls to calm her down. And she just stopped. And her eyes went as big as saucers. And she looked at this character and said, "You're an elf." And that was it. That player who didn't necessarily want the job had the task now, with support / pressure from all the rest of the party, of further calming her down and of finding out what she could tell them. And it was just a really nice moment, particularly as the elf was played by a 14-year-old boy who clearly just wanted the range combat bonus. And the fighter was played by somebody's girlfriend who was doing the game under sufferance, but just suddenly realized what role playing was about and was prompting the elf player across the table how to deal with this small child.
On my front, I can keep this one relatively fast. My best, if I'm looking for just a single experience rather than campaigns, which are always fun, my best is almost certainly the game that I ran at Games Day back in about 2006 for Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition. And the reason it was the best experience was because I crafted an adventure which was designed for me to play it 50, 60 times and never get bored. And it was only my 5th go of it. But by the end of the adventure, there was me standing up in front of the group of 6 players, and there was a crowd of around about 150 watching. And it was proper participation, because not only did none of the players quite know what was going to happen next, I didn't know what was going to happen next. No one watching knew what was happening next, and I was narrating on my way through it, waiting for the players to come up with the various betrayals that they all had crafted in front of them as potential outcomes, and I didn't know who had what. And as they arrived at the vampire lair, and then one of the PCs immediately turns around, points a crossbow pistol at the back of the other one, falls down on his knees, pledges his eternal servitude towards the vampire, and then shoots his mate. The crowd goes wild at this. The guy who's just been betrayed turns around and goes, "You what? I'm on his side!" And the vampire looks on, utterly annoyed, because the person who was his servant has just been shot by the person trying to pledge himself to the vampire. It was hilarious. Everybody's laughing. There's people from all manner of different backgrounds getting involved with roleplay who had never done it before in their life. And it was just a really affirming experience for everyone involved. Lots of chat about the role-playing afterwards. And the least favourite bit is something very recent, which is Andy and I have been recently crafting a lot of narrative for a campaign, but it means I can't play it with him. And I'm very used to using Andy as a foil for trying shit out on poor Andy. And I can't, because I can't, because he knows it all. So that's rubbish. So there you go, a best and a worst.
My best. I'm not sure it qualifies under the question heading precisely, but certainly one of my most memorable experiences of a game that I'm involved in making, I would have to say, was convincing Rick Priestley that squig hoppers should be a thing. Because
that was you. At the time, we've got you to thank for that.
He thought they were too silly, and I said, "No, they're not.
They're not.
They're just silly enough. They are the perfect level of silly."
Yeah,
that was what I thought.
Yeah.
My worst experience was actually as a player in World of Warcraft. I would play on although I was a PvE player. I just wanted to quest and explore. I wasn't into the PvP. I wasn't into gearing up my character for sort of combat with other actual people. But I liked the threat of playing on servers where you never knew what might be coming at you. And I'd forever go to Tarren Mill, which if you play World of Warcraft, it's a horde village, but it's on the edge of an alliance territory where you've got much higher level alliance players, and they would forever swarm over into Tarren Mill and kill all the horde players that they could find. And this happened to me several times. And eventually I hit max level in original WoW, and I thought, right, I'm going back there now. I'm going back to Tarren Mill to wreak my bloody vengeance on these alliance players. So I get off my flying mount, and I'm a warlock, and I'm ready to take on anybody I see. And then 2 gnome rogues, invisible gnome rogues, pounce on me, kill me instantly. So my vengeance was snatched away from me. So that's one of my worst experiences of something I was working on at the time.
That's awful.
So this is one from the Twitch chat. What are your favourite themes to explore in a game or are never done justice? I've talked to Andy about this quite recently. So one thing that I don't think is ever done very well in written games is having worlds that have young people in them, children and young people. And to a certain extent, I understand why that is, because it would be pretty terrifying if you have a murder hobo party that then are faced with a whole bunch of orphans. But I do feel it means that the themes of parenting and care and altruism and growing up and adolescence into adulthood and the shifting of responsibilities never really get explored properly or done justice to. And so it often feels to me in role-playing games that there's whole bits of society that are just carved out and missing and are never talked about in the source books and are never really in the adventures either. So that would be mine.
Many of them make really good locations to adventure in as well. You tend to find that these are the sort of areas that often get picked on often more by a computer game, where they will purposely pick out, say, an orphanage because it's spooky and weird, or they'll pick out something else that's it's almost represented, particularly with some Japanese games. If you look at, say, your Resident Evils, Ep1, where they will often look at the psychological background of their characters that have led them to become zombie-slaying motherfuckers, put it bluntly. And in role-playing games, you tend to find that because we have a limited amount of space in terms of what we can put down in print, you tend to find that we stick to the salient details, the top-level stuff, and all the bottom-level stuff either gets ignored or it becomes the only focus.
Yeah.
So, for example, in Vampire, you tend to find that the personal tragedy becomes often the only focus. So there's a lot of depth there, but it tends to be always generally the adult depth, unless you go a bit Black Dog. And I broadly agree with Lindsay, but my favorite themes to explore is generally satire. I can't help it. I really like looking at satire and satirizing stuff. I don't think it's done particularly well in most games. I like using humor to look at power structures and tear them apart and show them for the idiots that they are. And it's something that I personally like to involve in as much of what I do as possible. So there we go.
Yeah, I'm very much of a similar mind to Andy there. I cannot resist an opportunity to puncture pretension or let people mess up in funny and spectacular ways. I did that as a GM, particularly if a character took himself too seriously, or if a player took his character too seriously. You know, that was a red rag. So, but yeah, Murphy's Law, let's say, is a good thing to explore in a game. There used to be a game called Murphy's World, but I don't think it did it terribly well.
I think for me, it's something that I actually spoke about in one of our podcasts streams before, about, and it's something that we're building in to the Rookery stuff, which is consequences. Like, I think a lot of adventures, they have like short-term immediate consequences, and then things move on. Like your players, die or they don't die. They kill the bad guy, or they don't kill the bad guy, and the bad guy is never seen again. Or they do something bad and then they move on to another city, and hence the whole murder hobo thing. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to build something that's going to be an epic campaign that's going to unfold in a it's a very big city, but it is just a city. It is a single large kind of geographical kind of place. So there have to be consequences for things, but those consequences have to be liberating and moving the story forward, not restrictive and shutting things down too much. And it's hard to think about and to do. We're setting ourselves a real challenge there, but it's a challenge I'm really enjoying because I think it's important. So yeah.
Yeah, indeed, making sure that as the players do stuff, the GM remembers it, and when things happen later, the GM goes, "Well, this has happened now," and the players go, "But oh no, I didn't have done that."
Yeah,
Great JP. Party would need to be paid to be murder hobo. Still out there, still getting paid.
Yeah, my answer is the same as Andy's. Absolutely, consequences or the effects, how the players influence and change the world around them. I remember way back in the day, I was running a RuneQuest campaign, and I cannot remember for the life of me what the party had done to earn themselves a sort of a nickname. Their band was in their hometown, were regarded quite heroically, sort of saviors of the realm, and they had no idea till they returned to town after one particular gory and glorious adventure that they were sort of celebrated, and it affected them sort of quite deeply at the time. They got quite excited by it. The notion that as they're away hacking away, earning experience points and gathering treasure and the like, that they were having an effect on the world around them. So yeah, I would agree. Consequences.
Yeah, that's something that I think is terribly important. I hadn't really thought of it that deeply before, but the world giving something back to the players, it's more than something that they just move through and effect. It's something they're part of and that responds to them in more ways than just providing enemies and loot.
Yeah, I don't remember many of the towns round about Talipine, but I do remember Bad Dankerud because for a short time we were the heroes of Bad Dankerud.
Good times.
In one of our rare heroic moments. So if you could pick one person to work with that you've never worked with before, who would it be and why?
Mine was relatively easy in this one. It's just purely based on one thing, and that's regret, which is never a good thing to base anything on, but it is true. About 3 years ago, I was down in Nottingham in Bugman's, drinking Bugman's beer, indeed, with Gav Thorpe, and we were planning a big campaign for Warhammer. And it was all manner of awesome as we were putting things together. Ben Sherry was there as well. He was the assistant producer at the time, and we were deep in plotting in a fashion that made us both exceedingly excited. Unfortunately, though, as we all know, I resigned from the producing job, and that never came to pass. And I spoke to Gav not long afterwards, and we both went, well, that's a real shame, because this is going to be really, really freaking awesome. And he was like, yeah, it was. I mean, this felt like the campaign I was designed to write or something along those lines. It was really, really good. And we're like, well, we'll do it again later. Never happened. So pick one person that I've never worked with before that I wish I had? Gav, because it was meant to happen and it didn't.
Oh, that's such a shame. Yeah. Yeah. Well, for me, I'd have to say Robin Laws, because everything he writes on the subject, he has a mind that encompasses the art and science of role playing and the applications of it, and he comes up with stuff that I don't think anyone else could ever think of, and he makes me think, he makes me reconsider the art and craft every single time he comes out with something, and that's amazing.
I'm going to say Guillermo del Toro, and I'd like to work with him when he directs the movie adaptation of The Coiled Crown. I think that'll be marvelous.
Yay.
all on board with
Fine
that.
ambition, yes.
Seems fair.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think possibly because Andy started talking about regret, and that's making me think. What I wish he sadly passed away now, but Ian Banks is far and away my favorite author. I did my dissertation on him at uni. I'm obsessed by everything, and I would absolutely have loved to work with him on a culture RPG. I think that would have been a really, really interesting. It's such a vast and all-encompassing sci-fi world that you can play so many different kind of games. It's such an interesting sort of post-scarcity universe that he's created, and it would have been good fun kind of talking to him and deep diving into some of the concepts there to represent that in an RPG. So yeah.
I'd like to work with Nathan Long, because I've known Nathan for a while, but I've never actually worked with him. And I think I've loved the novels that he wrote for Warhammer, and because I've seen the stuff that him and his now wife do together, planning the games that they are planning. I would like to work with Nathan. I think that would be great. And once Guillermo has made our adaptation, when they do the documentary, who would you want to portray you in the inevitable musical comedy biopic Rookery now?
Easy. Super easy. It's obviously Ewan McGregor. Because get the beard out. He can go all a little bit Jedi, and he'll almost suit me perfectly. Go a little bit Moulin Rouge, and we're in. Done. I'm well up for that.
All right.
And I suppose for me, it would then have to be Ewan McGregor, but with like a prosthetic to look slightly different.
Do we all pick Ewan McGregor?
Yeah.
Even Lindsay.
And he could probably do it. Yeah.
Well, if you've got to sing as well, and if we're going with fellow countrymen, I suppose I've got to go with Luke Evans at the moment, because he's Welsh, he's got a good voice, and he's far more handsome than me. So why not? And I am an Evans, so that's the family connection too. So why? Yeah, sure.
Right.
I know who I'd want to play me, but I've completely forgotten her name.
Oh, that's not going to help.
Yeah.
The one in Line of Duty last week.
Vicky McClure.
Vicky McClure.
No.
Oh, what's
the Scottish one?
Kelly MacDonald.
Kelly MacDonald. Yeah.
No comment.
No comment.
Just your hair is more like Vicky McClure's just now. That was
true.
why that was the more obvious one.
That's exactly what I
true.
thought.
Yeah. Well, I've been told I look not unlike Mark Strong, And over the years, I've allegedly resembled a number of people, including Paul Weller, Pete Townsend, and I can't remember the third one. But I think probably I should be played either by Wallace or Nosferatu. Since I am essentially the love child of the two.
Wow.
Love it.
Oh no, that's another silly. So since you all started gaming, what do you feel has changed the most in the way you play? Well, I started gaming when I was, and I've got the book to prove it. I think I was in primary 2, which means I was 6, and I played D&D at a boy's house down the road in his pool room. We don't really have swimming pools in Scotland, but this boy did. And I played an elf called Angel. So I suppose I was 6.
Yeah.
So I don't play elves called Angel anymore. Not much else has changed.
Hang on. Sorry, I was just getting out if we're talking about the first
there it is. Yeah.
We played is mine.
Yeah.
So it's first edition Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
I suppose what's changed most in the time is sort of accessibility and the choices that you have as a gamer now. You know, it used to be so niche, such a tiny audience, and now it's so mainstream.
That's
right.
right.
The choices there are incredible.
You don't have to constantly explain it to people and reassure them that you're not conducting human sacrifices.
No, it's not. It's not actually Satan. My mum was delighted when I found a role play group there, because she thought it got me out of the house. It got me to develop my social skills and learn some basic maths.
It was pretty mainstream at my primary school. So it was a village primary school. So there was 8 of us in the primary school, including my brother. We were in the same classroom with the same teacher. And pretty much the entirety of P1 to P3 was role-playing. So like 6 of us.
Wow. Yeah.
All 6. So I just thought it was normal. Like that's what everyone did. When I went to the big school in town, that was another story.
If I was to pick on one thing that's changed for me specifically is my lack of care about rules while simultaneously obviously making them for things. When I was young, rules were almost the be-all and end-all. The system that you were playing was super important. But as I grew older, the people I was playing with, the stories that were being told, the rules often got in the way rather than helped provide the roleplay situations that we were most looking for ourselves. The number of dice rolls in comparison to say 10, 15 years ago dropped. I mean, not always. It depended on the system of the day and depended on when dice rolls were called for, because often whenever it reached a point of, well, let's find out whether your character passes or not, rather than just narrating the whole thing. But I can often do an entire roleplay session without any dice rolls at all, and they are just as good, often better than the ones that have the dice rolling involved with them. So for me, story has become more important than dice rolling. If I was to drop it down on one thing, the shared storytelling experience and coming up with really compelling narratives, which is, I suppose, one of the reasons why what we're doing at the moment, where we're building a system-free campaign, it in some respects is super freeing from that perspective, because we no longer need to worry about catering to the individual systems of whatever the game of the day happens to be.
And, you know, that brings us full circle, and it's something I think Andy and I were going to talk about on a podcast, and that is where everyone, well, certainly where I started, and that was pretending to be Princess Leia in a school playground alongside Han Solo and Luke and various other, the poor person who was nominated to play Darth Vader, and just like free-form role-playing before you even knew the words about role-playing, and you just, that's just what kids did. You played.
That's right. Yeah.
That's it. And I mean, it's very similar to what Andy's saying, but obviously more from the other side of the table. But like, certainly when I was playing as a teenager, when I was role playing like a lot, it was often very oppositional with the games master. And I've got a particularly memorable one actually with Andy's cousin, Dave, who went to school with me, and he was GMing Cyberpunk, I think it was. and we were trying to get some of my other mates who'd never roleplayed before into it, and and it became a tit for tat thing of we would come up with a plan to get around the obstacle, and then he would just throw some random thing in to stop us being able to achieve success. And then we would come up with something to get past that, and he would just, and it was just about him trying to beat us, and then us trying to beat him, and we were stuck in this oppositional rat race that just ended up not being fun. And we all just stopped, and then it just drifted, and we stopped playing that game. So, yeah.
And there was a question from Jaleb on that. The relationship between the players and the GM is often viewed as competitive or even antagonistic. How do you see it? And actually, I see it that the issue with it being antagonistic is the imbalance of power. So as players, you have an entirely contained sphere of influence. And as the GM, you have an entirely untrammeled sphere of influence. So if you view it as competitive, then inevitably the GM's going to win. And it's not going to be fun.
Yeah, and it's not healthy for I mean, I've seen some GMs, like you said, Andy, where a TPK is a win for the GM, and that's the objective, rather than. And it's a balance, I've through my years of GMing, I started out thinking that way, and then it was like, well, I just want to make them work really hard, which I still do. And but it was a while to get, one of the first things I was asked when I took up role playing, I think it was my mum, when I came back from my first D&D session, she said, well, okay, who won? It's not like that.
Yeah,
we all won.
Admittedly, though, for some early games, they were almost pitched like that. They were pitched more like Hero Quest or Warhammer Quest or something similar, where you've got the GM who's running the bad guys and the dungeon, and you've got the players who are attempting to get down there, get to the bottom, and steal all the cool loot. And so you can completely understand why you've got yourself what's effectively a board game, but narratively spoken sometimes, but often just represented with miniatures, and how you start there and you feel as you move into, say, a game that's a bit more narrativist, so to speak, as you move on to another game, and they still have that feeling. And so many of us started with games that were GM versus players, because that's how they were pitched as games. And as we moved on to other role-playing games, they would sometimes have to drag us into a different mindset. For me, the one that was, I would say, almost certainly the breaker for me was Warhammer. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was pitched differently, and for me, it played differently. And I played other games like, say, Call of Cthulhu, which Call of Cthulhu really did change everything before that Warhammer. But for me, it didn't click in the same way that it did when I played Warhammer. Because Warhammer was so much more like the fantasy games that were antagonistic, but it pitched them differently. If you played D&D and then moved to Warhammer, it was such an eye-opening experience in comparison to moving from, say, D&D to Call of Cthulhu, where it was a different experience. So for me, Warhammer was the one that dragged me kicking and screaming from an older mindset into a newer one. Until eventually, when we get old and beardy, and we're all like, rules, fuck off. I don't care. I don't need your rules. I don't need your dicer. I want my story.
It was definitely Call of Cthulhu for me, the investigative aspect of it, and our first game of Call of Cthulhu at college was an absolute disaster, because it's like, oh, I can buy a Tommy gun. All right, I'm having one in each hand. And then you meet a Shoggoth and you all go mad, and it's like, oh.
Yeah, totally.
I can still remember playing in my teenage years in a couple of campaigns where the antagonism ended up being between party members, and the party fractured, and the poor old GM, instead of doing like a 1 4-hour session, has to do two 2-hour sessions. And there's that, because the groups actually, they arrive, there's sort of sneering and sarcastic comments as one party leaves and the other one arrives to play their 2 sessions, and then the GM is desperately trying to act as peacemaker to get them back together so we can all have fun in the same room, which was the intention originally. So a couple of times I've seen that happen. That's rough.
I've seen it happen between players and GMs, players who feel unfairly treated and pitch a fit, or even GMs, more rarely in my experience, but who find, particularly when confronted with a rules lawyer player, they just get frustrated.
Right.
And, the ceiling collapses, you're all dead.
No fun.
No.
No, for anyone other than the GM, although not the GM really. Ultimately, I'm sure
No,
these players
ultimately
games.
it's just an act of pure petulance that benefits nobody.
Here's one from Long Shadow. What have you found most challenging starting your own project rather than working on someone else's? It's a good one because we've talked a lot about the benefits of starting our own project, but we haven't talked a lot about the differences and how challenging it can be to start your own business rather than working for someone else.
Mm.
Yeah, paying the mortgage.
That helps.
Yeah.
I have an answer to that from my own point of view, which is that when you're working for somebody else, you've got limits, and that's both a good thing and a bad thing. You know where the limits are. You know what you can get away with. With the Rookery, I find, and particularly since we're all so like-minded and occasionally childish, and ideas will just run away. And sometimes they do something brilliant like the Bog Mummy did, but we don't have like an sort of external force providing us with, okay, stop now, come back to the core of the idea, or that's too far, it's broad but shallow. Let's rein it in and save that idea for another day. And that's something we have to do for ourselves. And it's sometimes a little difficult.
I think we'll see probably more of that as we move on, because I mean, right now it's still sort of fairly blue sky stuff. We're still shaping the world. I think once we start releasing product and we set ourselves up with at least a vague time frame and schedule for when we want to get things out, I think there'll be some degree of self-regulation there.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think there are many things about the Rookery that are still we're still in the process of inventing, and that's one of them.
Yep, agreed. I'm just going to say, agreed completely, and also agreed that as time develops, we will come up with our own solutions to ensure that we get the things that we want done. And I will state my answer: money. Holy crap, money. Yeah. Money, and also money, because we're not asking for investors. We don't have other people saying, "Here, we'll give you all the money and own everything you're doing." We own this ourselves, which means, unfortunately, we also own all the pain.
All the pain, all the debt, all the expense.
Yeah, quite. And whilst we claw our way forwards towards our first releases, it is an interesting experience. So for me, that's the toughest part.
I quite like this comment from Sassy Pancakes. Roleplay, a lifelong social skills development course. When I've had a tricky meeting at work and Andy's given me a pep talk, or a pretty difficult confrontation, the watchwords in our house are, well, I mean, there are no Carl Franz. And that sees me right every time.
True fact.
So, which one of you is the biggest nautical enthusiast, and how did you all restrain them from going overboard on Ship of Fools?
Oh.
Shall I put my pirate costume on? Would you like me to slip away?
I did actually learn the hornpipe. Well, I had learned it as a child, so I relearned the hornpipe last week.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have a fairly fast one since time's beginning to tick. So I'm a pretty big nautical enthusiast, I'll be honest. I grew up in a harbour in a lighthouse. I sailed when I was a kid. Every year I used to go on warships for our local, let's call them festivals. They're like gala weeks and similar down in the harbours, where warships would come in and about 7 or 8 of them would sit there. You could go from ship to ship, have a little tour around, and that was great. All manner of tall ships would come in and such like as well. I grew up with this stuff. I love this stuff. The language that I use for this stuff isn't necessarily the same as everybody else because I came from a tiny part of Scotland at the very north, so far away from everyone else that we managed to build our own dialect for half a dozen different things. For example, we don't call them buoys, we call them buoys, those little things that attach to creels. We call them buoys. Why do we call them buoys? Well, because of the Norse connection. There's a variety of different reasons. But our language is a big mishmash, and I love bringing all those little details into what we're doing because it makes everything feel just that little bit more real when it's got its own dialectical language working around it, and all those little details which you generally only get if you've been first-hand experiencing them. So there we go. Quickly, my bit. Oh, plus I wrote the Warhammer Navy stuff. And I do
but I researched it for you. My mum and dad were in the Navy. You get the sense it's just a constant sense of one-upmanship between me and Andy Law about who has the most nautical family.
Which I don't, but I quite like Hornblower.
Yeah. Oh,
Fishing net.
There. Yeah.
I have fishing net.
He says,
I got fish nets. Oh, wait a minute.
Steady now. Yeah. Yeah.
So, on the topic of fantasy authors from a few minutes ago, which novel has been the most inspirational or influential to your professional works?
Easy.
I feel like I was about to say, I feel like we're on one of those things when you have to know your spouse, and I would say for you, Michael Moorcock. Oh, it's tricky.
It's the Eternal Champion.
Erika's the Eternal Champion.
It's the Eternal Champion. It's the core of the entire series. It's the source of so much that is Warhammer. And at its core, the philosophy and the difficult choices that book presented to the core character are something that have influenced me to this day. By the end of that book, that character is in a position where he has to make an awful choice, and he does. And that is something that influenced me right from childhood with my neophyte thinking, right the way through to adulthood, and how I appreciate how different fantasy worlds can be presented in different ways. So there we go. A single book. That's my choice.
It's a hard question.
Yeah,
it is a hard one. Like in terms of specifically professional stuff. I mean, like possibly actually, because obviously a lot of what I've done, certainly pre-Rookery, was setting related stuff. So actually, like maybe Charles Dickens. Like I definitely try and get a sense of, because he blends like serious stuff and poverty and really deep themes about injustice and things with like whimsy and humor and believable characters, as well as larger than life almost characters, and they can exist side by side and have conversations. And I think that's something I've always kind of striven for in my setting and my NPCs and things. So
proper social commentary in there as well. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So not a fantasy author, but
I think it's got to be the Narnia books.
Oh God! How dare you!
I feel dirty.
I mean, I knew it was coming.
A constant source of inspiration to me in many ways, not just professional parenting advice, religious thoughts. No, I'm joking.
Well, if we're limiting it to novels, because I read an awful lot of non-fiction and plunder that for ideas, I couldn't give you an individual title, but the City Watch series by Terry Pratchett underlies an awful lot of my gaming, quite a bit of Wolfram. And, it's that mixture of grime and social commentary and slapstick, all kind of stirred up together. And Pratchett presents it as comedy, but it's so much more than that. And it can, it just resonates with something deep inside me, perhaps because I was raised on Carry On movies.
But again, though, much like with Dickens, like there's a real strong undercurrent of not just satire but social commentary in Pratchett stuff as well. And I don't think they would have the level of like lasting appeal and the intensity of affection that people have for them if it wasn't for the heart that was in them as well. I
completely agree. I mean, probably 3 or 4 times a year I find myself wanting to quote Samuel Vimes's philosophy of the boots to explain social inequality.
Yeah, and the other thing about Dickens, just coming back to what I was mentioning about young people's worlds, young people's inner lives, adolescence and the journey to adulthood. Actually, Dickens was really good at that. There's been lots of comments in the chat about, well, what would a role play about family life be? And that wasn't really what I was getting at. What I was just getting at is when you're building a world, if you don't have those aspects and you don't understand the journey from adolescence to adulthood for the people in that world, I don't really see how you can create complex, understandable adults. And I think Dickens is good at that.
That's very true, and it's been an act of cowardice, I think, on designers' parts, because children are such a hot button issue in a world of violence and what have you.
I think, Mark, were you going?
Sorry.
Yes, in terms of insightful social commentary, I would have to say Robert E. Howard's Conan novels were obviously a massive influence on me. Certainly. What it was the as a kid growing up, and I always sort of, little sponge for soaking up cool fantasy stuff. There was a secondhand bookshop in my hometown, and it was the Frank Frazetta paintings on the cover of every Conan book that just drew me in. And that outside of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, this was a far more adult, violent, often sexy fantasy world that was still every bit as rich really as Middle Earth. But it was just sort of it just felt like, oh, this is the sort of a progression in terms of the savagery of it. I found really kind of drew me in. And as a teenage boy, these were cool adventure stories. The pulpiness mixed with the high fantasy and often very low fantasy was a big influence on me.
I think we've got time for one more. Maybe just this one, which is a follow-up question. What has been your most surprising but consistent source of inspiration?
Surprising is the tough bit of that question. Let me lean back. Yeah, that's a toughie.
I can answer that simply with like everything. Like I don't think there's an aspect of literature or pop culture that I'm interested in that I haven't mined at some point for something. Things that are obviously fantasy, things that are obviously grounded, like Breaking Bad's been in there, Pulp Fiction's been in there, like anything you can name that I like, I've managed to find some way to do something with it. It's easier in Warhammer because you just turn the name German and ta-da.
I agree. The surprise is that everything is grist for the mill.
I think, everyday life and things that happen to you and things that you see when you're on a bus or at, in a job that wasn't this job. That's what's been the constant surprising for me. Like I'm always jotting stuff down, and I'll be doing something in a role about, I don't know, bank regulation, and I'll think, oh, that would be like a really good idea for that bank that Andy has put in, that part of the city. I'll have to write that down and come back to it later. Probably money laundering. That's the most surprising
there is
source of inspiration.
There's one specific one, and I can't say too much because it's in something that's not out yet and probably won't be out for quite a while. But in one of our later locations, it's going to come out. There is a deep cut in one of the adventure hooks based on the painting, The School of Athens. And I can almost guarantee nobody's going to get it, but that was it's a very cheap gag if you work out what I've done. So yeah, that's probably the most surprising.
My morning walks, my strolls around the bay where I live, and it's just become part of my creative process. Is that I know that when I'm out there for an hour, any issues, any problems, any visual or design challenges I have, as long as I've sort of programmed my brain to think about it, when I'm out there on that walk, at some point a solution will pop into my head. And it's become so consistent, and it's something I absolutely rely on as part of my process. So during pandemic, during the lockdown, when the Back Bay filled with people who should have been stuck at home avoiding other people, I stopped going out there. And I ended up, in order to still have that sort of mindless exercise, I started doing like dog-style zoomies around my living room downstairs. And I realized if I did 250 zoomies, it was equivalent of a 2-mile walk, which was mental. If anybody looked into the window and saw me doing that, they'd be calling the authorities. But it still provided me with that disengagement of the conscious brain, and ideas would still pop through. So that's been the most consistent vehicle for inspiration for me.
That's made me realize what the most surprising one actually is, and that's architecture. So whenever I'm traveling, architecture, the stories in every building. There's stories on the building, in the building, about the building, and nobody looks up and nobody notices them, and it's everywhere. And I've taken so much from that, from traveling around the UK and other countries as well.
That's a good one. I'm going to go for something completely different because I've had a wee think, and I've tried to think of something that's constantly inspired me, but is perhaps not expected for someone who's writing role-playing games. And for me, it's, of all things, my daughters. Why? The reason being is we all make choices and decisions about what we do and don't do in life. And many of the choices that I have made have been made purely because I sat down and went, if I was explaining this to my daughter, would you think this was a good thing or a bad thing? And the answer is a bad thing. I'm doing the wrong thing. So as a source of constant inspiration, I would say my kids, who have channeled me without ever being aware of it, without ever actually saying Dad X and Dad Y, just literally being there and me thinking, what am I going to say to them about whatever it is that I'm doing just now? And I want to ensure that I'm creating something that they will be as proud of as I am. And as an unlikely source of inspiration, it's constantly there in the background, them, my kids. That doesn't mean that I don't kill everything and murder them and go down all manner of horrible, crazy stuff with the material I create, because I totally do. And my kids are proud of that because they're bloodthirsty, because they're my kids. But yeah, my kids. There you go.
I mean, I could also add that my fellow Rooks are, of course, a constant source of inspiration, but that's not surprising.
Yeah, that's
true.
Not. Yeah, true. We're terribly bad influences on each other.
We are. Oh, well, that's us come to the end of our allocated time slot. And so it is with deep regret on another Saturday night I say goodbye to you all. Thank you to everyone for all your questions. Thanks for your comments. And hopefully we'll see you all again next week.
Yep. Thanks, all. It was great.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.